She laughed in my face when I handed her the gift, told me I was pathetic. She didn't know I just handed her the key to her own downfall. I can still hear the sound of it, her laughter. It wasn't soft, not the kind that comes when you're surprised or touched. No, it was sharp. Cruel. The kind that cuts deeper than any knife. She didn't just reject the gift. She rejected me. It was supposed to be a symbol of everything I felt for her. The nights I stayed up working, the sacrifices I made, the hours I poured into creating something that I thought she would cherish. Instead, she looked at it as though it were trash. I remember the words, "This is it. This is all you could come up with. God, you're so pathetic." Those words burned into me. They replayed in my head like a broken record. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't have known, was that the very thing she mocked, the thing she tossed aside so easily, was worth more than she could ever imagine. And one day, it would become the reason her whole world came crashing down. I never saw myself as much of anything, really. Just a man with paint on his hands and dreams too heavy to carry sometimes. My world was small, brushes, canvases stacked against the walls of my tiny apartment, and the quiet comfort of old books whose pages smelled of dust and time. I wasn't rich, not in money, but in the way I could lose myself in creation. That was my wealth. My curse, too, maybe. Then she walked in. Elena. I met her at a gallery, of all places, a quiet little show downtown that nobody really went to unless they had nothing better to do on a Friday night. I was standing in the corner, watching people pretend to understand the art, when she found me. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. Her laugh was warm, her smile disarming, and she looked at me as though I wasn't invisible. That alone was enough to shake me. "You painted that one, didn't you?" she asked, pointing at a piece I thought no one would even notice. I nodded, nervous. "How'd you guess?" "Because it feels different. Like someone actually cared when they made it." That was Elena in the beginning. She had this way of making me feel seen. Of making me believe I mattered. And God, I wanted to believe it. We started talking that night and never really stopped. Coffee dates that turned into hours of laughter. Walks through the park where she would hold my hand and tell me about her dreams, how she wanted to travel, to live in a place where the sun always seemed to shine. She confessed her fears too, late at night when the world was quiet. She hated the idea of being forgotten. She needed to be adored, remembered. I told her my fears in return. That maybe I'd never be good enough. That maybe my art would die with me, unappreciated. She pressed her lips to mine and whispered, "I see you. That's enough." So I gave in. And I gave in. I worked extra hours, picked up jobs I hated just to have more to offer her. When she said she wanted to see the coast, I skipped paying for new supplies to save for the trip. When her car broke down, I emptied the little I had set aside to fix it. She never asked outright, but the way her eyes lingered on things, the way she sighed about what she couldn't have, I filled in the blanks. We had our own little rituals. She loved late-night pancakes, so I'd surprise her with them at midnight, flour dusting my clothes while she laughed in the kitchen. She teased me about how I hummed when I painted, and said it was my tell, like I was cheating in poker. She used to curl up on my couch, sketching meaningless doodles while I worked, and sometimes I'd catch her staring at me with something that looked like pride. Those were the moments that kept me alive. The gift, it was supposed to be the culmination of all of that. A rare book I'd hunted for months, a first edition of a collection she once said was her favorite when she was younger. I found it tucked away in an old shop, spine worn but pages intact, a treasure forgotten by most. It cost me more than I should have spent, but I didn't care. I imagined her face lighting up, the way she'd hug it to her chest, maybe even cry. I imagined her seeing me. Really seeing me. I poured myself into that gesture, just like I had poured myself into everything with her. Every sacrifice, every choice, every quiet compromise. To me, that gift wasn't just a book. It was proof. Proof that I listened, that I remembered, that I loved. Proof that I was worth something, if only to her. I thought it would be the thing that bound us closer. That she'd look at it and finally understand how much of myself I'd given away just to make her smile. But smiles. They can hide sharp teeth. At first, I told myself nothing was wrong. People change, moods shift, life gets heavy. That's what I repeated in my head every time I noticed something off with Elena. But the cracks were there. Hairline fractures spread slowly, almost invisible until they weren't. It started small. She used to ask me about my paintings, what I was working on, what inspired me. She'd sit for hours, watching, listening. But then, one night, she glanced at the canvas I'd been struggling with and said flatly, "Why do you keep wasting time on this? You know it's not going to pay the bills." I laughed it off at first, pretending she was joking. "It's what I love. You know that." She didn't laugh with me. She just shrugged, scrolling through her phone. "Love doesn't buy houses, though. Maybe you should think about that." I swallowed the sting. She was right, wasn't she? I didn't have much. But still, it felt like something inside me had been chipped away. It only got worse. She started canceling plans more often. "Work's been crazy," she'd say, or "I'm just exhausted." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Until one night, at 2 in the morning, I woke to see her phone light flashing on the nightstand. Messages. One after another. I reached out, instinctively, but she snatched it up before I could see. "Just a friend," she said, voice sharp, defensive. I nodded, forced a smile. Of course. But the seed of doubt was planted. She became secretive, guarding her phone like it held state secrets. Excusing herself to take calls in another room. Coming back with that too bright smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. When I told my friend Marcus about it, he frowned. "Man, that doesn't sound good. Are you sure she's being straight with you?" "She's tired," I insisted. "She's under pressure. You don't know her like I do." But even as I said it, the words tasted like ash. The distance grew. The woman who once curled up in my lap while I painted now spent hours away, unexplained. When she was home, she barely looked at me. And when she did look at me, it wasn't with pride anymore. It was something else. Something colder. One night, she came back from dinner with some friends I didn't know well. She tossed her heels onto the floor, laughing. "God, you should have seen Ethan's new car. A Tesla. Sleek, black, perfect. Now that's success." I forced a chuckle. "Guess I'll stick to my brushes." Her laugh this time was different. Hollow. Mocking. "Yeah, you and your little paintings. Real empire you're building there." The words landed like a slap. She compared me more often after that. To Ethan. To Jenna, who had just landed a high-paying job. To her cousin who bought a condo. I always came up short. Always, I was the one she measured against the world and found lacking. Still, I clung to the good memories, to the hope that the woman I'd fallen in love with was still there somewhere. I brought her flowers when she seemed down, cooked her favorite meals, tried to make her laugh with our old inside jokes. Sometimes she smiled, but it was thin, distracted. Like she wasn't really there with me anymore. I told myself I could fix it. If I just worked harder, loved her more, gave more of myself, she'd remember what we had. But deep down, a voice I didn't want to hear kept whispering the truth: she wasn't interested in love anymore. She was interested in what love could give her. We were lying in bed one night when she asked, out of nowhere, "Do you ever think about what it'd be like to have real money? Don't worry about scraping by." "Of course," I said. "But money isn't everything." She turned toward me, her face half hidden in the dark. Maybe not to you. But I don't want to struggle forever. I want more. Her tone carried something final. Something dangerous. That was the moment I realized, the Elena I thought I knew was slipping away. And I had no idea just how far she'd already gone. The night it all shattered didn't come with fireworks. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting match that split the air. It was quieter than that. Colder. It was her birthday. I'd been waiting for weeks, eager to finally give her the gift. I had poured my soul into finding that first edition I'd stumbled upon in a forgotten bookshop, the same one she'd once told me had changed her life as a girl. I had held on to it, hidden it away, planning the perfect moment. When I handed it to her, wrapped carefully in simple brown paper, my hands shook. "This is for you," I whispered. "Something special." She peeled it open slowly, the room crowded with her friends. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd light up the way she once did. That sparkle in her eyes, that laugh that used to melt me, maybe I'd see it again. Instead, silence. Then laughter. But not mine. Hers. She held the book up like it was a joke, turning to her friends. "Can you believe this? He got me a book. An old, dusty book. Like I'm supposed to swoon over this?" They laughed with her. My stomach twisted, heat flooding my face. I tried to explain. "It's not just a book. It's rare, a first edition. You told me once." "Please," she cut me off, rolling her eyes. "Don't embarrass yourself. You think I care about some worthless antique? God, you're pathetic." The word hit harder than any fist could. Pathetic. She'd said it before, but never like this. Never in front of others. I forced a smile, choking down the storm inside me. I told myself she didn't mean it, that maybe she was drunk, showing off. But I could see the truth in her eyes. She meant every word. A week later, I noticed the book was gone. "Where's the gift I gave you?" I asked carefully. She shrugged. "Oh, that? I sold it. Got like $200 for it. 200. For something I'd bled myself dry to buy, for something priceless to me, not just in value but in meaning." I stared at her. "You sold it?" "It was just sitting there," she said, her voice sharp, defensive. "I don't need junk lying around. At least I got something useful out of it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at my empty hands, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. Everything I'd given, every sacrifice I'd made, it all meant nothing to her. I was nothing to her. But fate has a way of twisting the knife. 2 days later, Marcus called me. "Are you sitting down?" "Why?" "You know that book you got Elena? I think I saw it online. Some dealer's selling it now. It's worth millions, man. Millions." I laughed bitterly. "You're joking." "I'm not. Check for yourself. First edition, signed by the author. It's one of a kind. People have been looking for it for decades." I did check. And he was right. The very book she mocked, the gift she tossed aside like trash, was worth more than I could ever dream of making in my lifetime. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. She hadn't just humiliated me. She hadn't just sold the gift. She had thrown away a fortune, our fortune, and laughed while doing it. And suddenly, the pieces began to fit. The late-night texts. The secretive calls. The new clothes she couldn't explain buying, the dinners she claimed were work events. She wasn't just distant. She wasn't just cruel. She was cheating. Manipulating. Using me as a safety net while she climbed towards something shinier, richer, more glamorous. I wanted to scream. To confront her, to throw the truth in her face. But I didn't. Instead, I sat in silence, my hands trembling, rage simmering under my skin like molten lava. Every insult, every mocking laugh, every moment I doubted myself because she came rushing back. She thought she had broken me. But she had no idea what she had awakened. For the first time, I didn't feel heartbreak. I didn't feel love. I felt something colder. Something sharper. Resolve. If she wanted wealth, status, and power, then I would give her exactly what she wanted. And then I'd take it all away. I learned fast that anger will make you loud, but planning makes you dangerous. After the book, after the laughing and the sale and Marcus's call that felt like a detonator, I stopped shouting and started listening. I stopped trying to fix what she had broken and began to map it. At first, it felt like reconnaissance. Quiet. Simple. I watched her the way I used to watch a painting come alive, patient, looking for lines no one else noticed. Where did she go at night? Who paid for the new dresses she'd been sliding into our closet? Who called her when she said she was working late? I kept my eyes where she couldn't see them, social media footprints, receipts left on the counter, the way her laugh changed when certain names came up. Little things that, strung together, made a rope. I made a list. People. Places. Weaknesses. Elena had friends, but they were the sort that came with hangovers and favors. Names I barely knew. Jenna, flashy, always talking about rooftops and brunch spots, a lipstick stain of a smile. Ethan, the car guy who'd bragged that his cousins got him connections. Then there was Marco, the dealer who'd bought the book. He was the first real lead. He'd sold the edition fast, put it up on a private auction site, and when Marcus messaged me a screenshot, I felt the room tilt. I needed Marco. But I couldn't knock on his door with accusations and expect anything to happen. You don't approach an enemy with anger and expect them to hand you victory. So I learned his language. I started small. I reopened old accounts I'd abandoned, collectors' forums, auction chat rooms, book restoration groups. I eased back into the world I'd loved before Elena occupied so much space in me. I posed as an interested buyer, then as a curious historian, then as a disgruntled ex-collector. I asked questions that sounded casual. How often did Marco appear at private sales? Who were his clients? What was his threshold for discretion? Over weeks, a pattern emerged. Marco belonged to a ring. High-end stuff, sold through back channels, laundered in plain sight. And Elena had been a tiny, shiny contribution to that machine. Information breeds options. Options breed power. With that in mind, I turned my attention to her money. Elena loved to look expensive. But looking expensive and being solvent are different things. I found that out the way you find a dry patch under a rug, by scraping until the stain shows. A few casual conversations at bars where her friends lingered, a timely, accidental, over here at a restaurant, and people started talking. Debt here. A loan there. A payday advance she'd taken and disguised as a business investment. That 3-day trip to Ibiza she'd bragged about. Charged to a card in her name, one that had nearly hit its limit. The dresses she paraded were on layaway. The glitter she wore was cheap paint masquerading as lacquer. These were leverage points. I didn't rub them in anyone's face. I folded them into plans like origami, hidden until the right moment. You don't expose someone's cracks when you want them to fall, you expose them when you want them to be watched fall. Next, reputation. Elena fed on it. She loved being seen in the right places. She breathed other people's mirrors until she could see herself reflected as wealthier, sexier, more important. So I started to rewrite what she stood on. I played at being small, at being broken. Friends noticed. They said I looked worse. I let them. Let them watch me sit on the stoop, nursing coffee that had gone cold, letting my face be the postcard for failure. It worked in a way I didn't expect. People's assumptions hardened around me. Elena relaxed into her victory. She liked the look of a man who would remain forever grateful and always available. She wanted nothing more. Meanwhile, I was building credibility in the opposite direction. Quiet money. A private buyer here. An anonymous donation to a gallery there. I sold a few pieces, nothing showy, and funneled the proceeds into a different account, one she didn't know existed. I used it to register a shell identity online, a consulting persona for art investments. It's amazing what a few well-worded posts and the right network can do. Suddenly, messages came. People offering introductions. Invitations to closed events. I accepted things she never saw. I sat in the corner of the room she would have loved to sit in and watch. I learned how the other half leveraged favors, how introductions turned into fortunes. It took patience. It took eating cold noodles and letting the heat of anger fade into the room where I planned. Anger makes you clumsy. Patience makes you precise. I also found weakness in her friends. Jenna, for instance, loved attention more than loyalty. She'd act as Elena's mirror, until someone else offered a better reflection. So I fed Jenna small, ego-stroking truths, a tip about a fashion editor who'd been stalking her Instagram, a flattered message about a party invitation she'd receive if she just showed up with the right accessory. Jenna ate it up. Soon, she was giving me timestamps and whispers about Elena's nights out, who she met, and the tiny confessions she let herself spill after a few drinks. I kept those bites of truth carefully, like magnets to use later. Not everything worked. I had setbacks that would have made a less stubborn man quit. I made one misstep with Ethan, a text sent from the wrong phone, an accidental tap that revealed a message that asked if I'd seen the guy with the paint stains. Elena noticed the message. She asked about it. I stammered something about an old fan. She smiled in a way that said she was faking ignorance. It was a close call. For 2 days I thought the whole plan had been blown. For 2 days, I trembled. But she didn't push it. She continued to boast and strut, confident that she had the upper hand. Confidence breeds carelessness. Carelessness births opportunities. I had to have surgery. So I set traps that looked like gifts. First trap, the small scandal. I planted a rumor, an innocuous whisper, that one of Marco's auctions had been investigated for shady provenance. Nothing direct. Just enough to make certain people, Elena and her circle, start asking questions. I let the rumor percolate in the right chat rooms, nudged by accounts I controlled. Elena's social phone calls increased. Her nervous laughter crept back into conversations. She began to call Marco, and he began to call her back. I listened. Second trap, a faux investor. I created the identity of a potential buyer, wealthy, discreet, enamored with rare finds and with an eye for acquisitions. I made contact with Marco through him, casually, all while being careful to cloak my own trail. Marco took the bait. He offered the book, wherever it was now, sold again or moved, at a private viewing. We set a time. Elena loved being at the center of scenes like that, and she loved being called by Marco to check something, with a wink. She came, naturally. She dressed for the room that had once been hers. Pride is a predictable costume. Every step was recorded. Not by scandalous cameras or illegal taps, nothing like that. I used legal, boring things like receipts, screenshots, and public chatter. I built a dossier, dates, transactions, messages, all leading to Marco and the network. I hired, quietly, a lawyer who specialized in provenance disputes and art restitution. That part cost money. It cost more than I expected. I dipped into the secret account. I rationed meals for a week. I sold a piece I loved. But every sacrifice felt like a deposit into a future bank of ruin I would withdraw from at the right hour. The biggest risk I took was emotional. I let myself look weak in front of Elena. I let my face be a monument to loss. I still hate admitting this, let her come back sometimes. Hope is like a thin rope and I used it to keep her in reach. She'd call, apologetic, lonely. I'd let her in for an hour, pour coffee, laugh at nothing. Those were the moments that almost broke me. I had to remind myself, vulnerability is not the same as surrender. I used those nights to listen, to study the cadence of her voice, the way she shifted when lying. I used them to put bait on hooks. Of course she nearly saw me. Twice she brushed against the edge of my plan. Once, she found a receipt for a hotel room I'd booked under the investor persona, left by mistake in a printout I'd forgotten to shred. She frowned at it, eyes narrowing. "Who's this?" she asked, voice low. "Remember that investor I told you about?" I said, calm. "Somebody reached out. I thought it was amusing." I shrugged. "Probably a scam." She rolled her eyes and tossed the paper aside. "Close. Too close." Another night, she caught me on a forum answering questions under the fake identity. She leaned over my shoulder and smirked. "So you're trying to be someone else now?" she teased, like she was amused. I kept my face blank. "Trying to learn," I said. "Trying to understand the market." She laughed and walked away, satisfied with the performance. She didn't know that behind every username I'd created there was a sliver of the truth I'd learned, how to make people see you as more than you are. Because that was the final piece, making other people do the work of my revenge for me. Reputation is a web, not a single thread. Once you tug at the right places, the net tightens. Days blurred into weeks. I tightened. I waited. I bought time by making sure my life looked broken enough to be ignored and secret enough to be unseen. I built alliances with the people she wouldn't suspect: Marco's disgruntled ex, Jenna's new boyfriend who resented her influence, a junior journalist hungry for a story that would push him into a better world. Small favors. Small debts. Everything compounded. By the time I was ready to strike, Elena had convinced herself I was defeated. She had started to lean on Marco and his network, on Jenna's shallow fandom, on the illusion that she could always trade for a little more status. She was careful but careless. She was sly but predictable. And that is the flaw I learned to love in her. When the plan was nearly complete, I sat at my kitchen table and didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty and steady, like the breath before a dive. Revenge is not a climax but a sequence of perfectly aligned dominoes. I had set them. Some would fall by my hand. Some would be knocked by others. I had no illusions it would make me whole. I want different things now. I wanted clarity. I wanted the scales to balance. I wanted the truth of what she did to be visible to the same people who had laughed at me on her birthday. And underneath all of it, something else: I wanted her to finally feel the cold precision of being replaced, not by another lover, but by the life she thought she could buy. I wanted her to watch it slip from her fingers. The traps were ready. The allies were in place. The money I'd saved and funneled into the shell accounts waited to be used. The lawyer had already drafted a cold letter about provenance that would sting louder when public. The investor persona had an offer in his pocket and the patience to withdraw at the right moment, dragging Elena's reputation with him. There would be setbacks. There always are. I kept thinking of that. Every plan that feels perfect on paper meets the crude, messy shape of reality. I rehearsed contingencies. What if Marco vanished? What if Jenna flipped and sided with Elena publicly? What if Elena actually came clean and tried to apologize in a way that could be used against me? Those thoughts made me sharper. They made me plan for being outmaneuvered. I learned to expect the unexpected. I built redundancies. I kept my face of ruin public. In private I was a machine. Cold. Mechanical. Focused. One night, I stood on the balcony of our apartment and watched the city. The lights below were a scatter of promises, some fulfilled, most not. Elena passed by the living room window, laughing on the phone, unaware I watched from only a few feet away. She looked happy. She looked free. I felt something like grief and something like satisfaction tangled together. I lit a cigarette I hated and didn't finish it. The plan didn't belong to the smoke. It belonged to the ledger in my head, the list I'd written in an old notebook, the emails I'd filed in a private account. Everything had a place. Tomorrow, one domino will fall. Then another. By the time the room realized what had happened, it would be too late for them to reconstruct how easily I had taught them to trust appearances. When she finally did notice the way the light had shifted, she wouldn't be able to find the switch. The room smelled like expensive perfume and ignorance. I had watched that room for weeks, watched the angle of the lights, learned where people took pictures, noted whose laughter carried and whose didn't. Tonight, it would hold its breath. I chose the venue carefully, a private viewing at a small museum that catered to collectors and the press. Marco had arranged the showing for a handful of buyers and a single, hungry reporter I'd quietly cultivated. He believed he was still in control. Elena believed she was untouchable. Both were wrong. I walked in like a man who'd been defeated. Hair unkempt. Stubble that had gone a day or two too far. I wore the hoodie she used to hate but had once said made me authentically me. I moved through the crowd slowly, on purpose, an extra step of performance. Elena saw me and smiled that practiced smile. It landed flat. She was a woman who'd been living on borrowed glances. Tonight the mirror showed a stranger. "You look terrible," she mouthed, as if scolding a pet. "Just tired," I said. My voice was neutral. Calm. That calm would be the knife. Marco ushered us into a dim gallery where a disheveled crate sat covered with a sheet. The private buyers leaned in like vultures. Elena stood with her arm looped through Marco's, chest puffed. She loved being the center of a crowd that meant something. Tonight, the crowd would be her jury. Marco pulled the sheet. The book I'd given her, no longer a relic to my heart but a weapon in my hands, sat where it had been propped. Marco grinned, handing it to the supposed investor I'd created, Alexander Kane, an alias I'd built with careful breadcrumbs, a persona of wealth and taste. He opened it with ceremonial reverence. "First edition," Alexander said, my voice, but smoother, richer. I'd rented it, borrowed it, made it sound like an old friend. Signed. Provenance looked solid. Shame it was sold irresponsibly. My words were gentle, surgical. Elena's smile wavered. She glanced at Marco. You found it again." Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. "Found? No." Marco's laugh was greedy. "It was retrieved. The collector's market turns quickly." The reporter I'd fed with hints and a single, damning email stood at the edge of the group now. He'd been promised the real story, the ring, the laundering, an expose that would sell. I'd given him what he needed, receipts, messages, dates tied to Elena's name. A tidy package for a man trying to climb. His phone buzzed. He glanced down, then at me. We had the look we'd rehearsed, the look of men who had watched a trade and suddenly saw a bigger cut. "Did you buy it?" Elena asked, jaw tight. "Not yet," Alexander said. He closed the book and held it up. "But provenance like this is a liability if sold through wrong channels." He let the words hang. They landed like old coins on a concrete floor. "Wrong channels," she scoffed, too loud. "What do you mean?" A murmur spread. Someone mentioned auctions. Someone else asked about legal checks. The journalist's fingers moved fast across keys. I watched as a new color leaked into Elena's face, fear edged with anger. She hadn't accounted for lawyers and journalists and men who keep paper trails. "Excuse me," I said, voice low, head bowed as if in apology. "I'm sorry to interrupt." People turned. I just wanted to say something. I sounded small, exactly what I had pretended to be. That book, my gift, was sold without my consent. I let the weight of those words hang in the air like a scent. Elena laughed. Please, he's trying to put on a show. He's delusional. You sold it, I replied. And you lied about it when I asked. It was not a plea. It was a fact. Cold, simple. I looked at the journalist. There's more. If you want the truth. I handed him the folder, copies of receipts, screenshots of conversations, Marco's auction posts tied to Elena's number. You wanted provenance? Here it is. By the time the word settled, the room had shifted. People looked at Elena the way they look at cracked lacquer. Marco's smile tightened. Elena's mouth opened and closed as if searching for a script she'd lost. You gave it away, someone asked from the back. Elena started, sparking. Her composure cracked. The club of friends who'd once reinforced her now searched for exits. Social armor, once pierced, reveals the thin skin beneath. The reporter took the folder and, without pretense, began to record. Are you Elena Roman? He asked, knife steady. Yes. Her voice was forced. Did you knowingly sell a rare, first-edition manuscript through private channels tied to known dealers under investigation for provenance irregularities? Elena's face drained. Laughter no longer came. She looked small on purpose, pitiful, calculating, disappointed in the audience. I needed the money, she said finally. I didn't know. It was just. I didn't think so. People leaned away. The investor, Alexander, closed the book like a judge dropping a gavel. This kind of negligence is a liability. My alias sounded disgusted. Not to mention the ethical implications. It wasn't a shout. It was an avalanche. Word climbed the walls, then the internet. The reporter left with the folder and a hunger. He promised follow-ups. The room disbanded in murmurs. I watched Elena's eyes dart, looking for anchors. Friends hesitated. Some stepped back. Jenna's face was a pale mask. Marco's hand lingered on Elena's elbow for a second too long, then slipped away, the way a dealer removes his touch from a bad lot. She tried to salvage it later, texts, breathless calls, late-night apologies. I panicked. I thought you were going to be angry. I thought I could turn it around. Her voice cracked on the phone, the same voice that had mocked me in that gallery months ago. I let her talk. I let her climb back on the ledge and wave her arms. You were never honest with me, I said finally. Not once. Please, she begged. I'll fix it. I can get it back. Just, let me. You sold something, I said. You made choices. That's when the investor, my double, did exactly what I'd planned. He walked away. The private offer I'd dangled dissolved into polite non-interest. Alexander took an interest elsewhere, suddenly in a rival lot. Marco found his buyers cooling. When the market smells contamination, shady provenance, people step back quickly. Elena's casual currency turned to contraband overnight. The public pieces found their way into print. The little expose hit the arts blogs first, then a local paper, then a national outlet. The journalist's piece was sharp and clinical: insider sales, questionable provenance, how private networks exploit desperation. It named Marco's ring and named Elena as one of the intermediaries. It included the screenshots. It included the dates. It included a photograph of Elena at the private auction, laughing with Marco, now reproduced and tagged in 100 comment threads. Her friends called. At first, the calls were short and trembling with loyalty, thin threads of protection. I overheard her beg them. You know me. You know I would never. They paused. The word now is brittle when backed by public record. Then the messages stopped. The invitations that once landed like confetti dried up. Jenna stopped returning texts. Ethan unfollowed her on social media. The social scaffolding she had leaned on collapsed like a poorly stacked set. She grew frantic. That's when pride becomes desperate. She stopped trying to charm and started to claw. She willfully stepped into the truth's path, posting glossy statements about mistaken judgment and learning. No one was fooled. People had seen the receipts. People had seen the phone logs. People had seen the smile on her face when she tossed my gift the first time. I could have left it there. But I wanted the orchestra to play a particular ending. I wanted the same people who'd laughed on her birthday to understand the scale of what they'd missed. So I made one final move. Using the lawyer I'd hired, I filed a provenance dispute in the name of an anonymous collector, me, but via the shell account. I requested an immediate freeze on items connected to Marco's network pending investigation. Courts and auctions move like sloths of justice, but when money and reputation are at risk, they move faster. The freeze put a legal spotlight on Marco's dealings and, by extension, Elena's fingerprints. I leaked the filing to the reporter. He published a follow-up with scanned court documents and a timeline that neatly pointed to Elena's sale. Public humiliation is a peculiar thing. It's not a single blow, it's 1,000 small ones. Invitations stopped. Her bank called about suspicious activity. A manager at a boutique called to say layaway had defaulted. A roommate she'd been counting on moved out, citing incompatibility. She called me then, voice thin and losing its practiced venom. I'm losing everything. You gave it away, I said. I know. Her voice had the hollow ring of someone who wakes up to find their pockets empty. You laughed at me, I said. Do you remember? I didn't know. But you sold it. Silence. You sold what you didn't understand. She came to me then, at my door, smelling of cheap perfume and regret. She stood on the threshold, hands empty. The woman who'd tossed my gift like trash was animated only by a single thought, salvage. Please, she whispered. Help me get it back. Help me fix this. I can make this right. I let the door close. I didn't invite her in. I stepped back into the light of my own studio and took out the little ledger I'd kept, numbers, dates, and a photograph of the book in a different hand, a place where it had been reborn by my own planning. The investor persona had placed a conditional bid that was public and then withdrawn, leaving a trail. Lawyers were moving. Authorities were asking questions. Marco was under quiet scrutiny. Elena had made herself visible in that scrutiny by being the one who'd sold the book. She begged. She threatened, finally. I'll take you to court for harassment, she said one night, voice sharp and thin. She tried to use the last of her bravado. You can't ruin me. You already started, I said. You ruined yourself. And then the poetic justice unfolded in the way I'd planned but in ways I couldn't fully control. Marco's operation was exposed further. He lost his top buyers who did not wish to be linked to fraud. Elena's name sat in legal documents. Social pages that once posted pictures of her in the best light now ran headlines. Jenna's loyalty, once purchased in laughter and favors, evaporated. Ethan avoided her calls. Her debt collectors started to call louder. I rose quietly. The book, by then, had been seized pending verification. The clamoring over it, legal maneuvers, the private investor me offering, then withdrawing, then offering again, played out like a chess game. In the end, I bought it back, not because I wanted the paper prize, but because it allowed me to control the narrative. The sale cost me more than I had in the beginning. I sold a few pieces. I asked favors. I swallowed again and again. But I had done the math, humiliation had its price. So did dignity. I chose dignity. When the book was back in my hands, I didn't scream triumph. I felt emptier and lighter at once. I had orchestrated ruin and paid a debt for it. But Elena's ruin was not a stealable trophy. It was a consequence. She lost more than a book. She lost the people who had validated her. She lost the face she'd painted for the world. The final scene was anticlimactic. She showed up to a small fundraiser the following month, her attempt to rehab her image. A handful of tastemakers were there, curious, polite. She stood in the doorway, smiles plastered on, while whispers followed. One by one, the same people who'd laughed at my gift the first time turned away, their expressions blank. No one applauded her when she gave a brief speech. The words felt plastic. The applause that followed was polite and minimal. For the first time since she'd walked into that gallery, she stood without the roar of the room behind her. I sold the book the following year to a museum under strict conditions, anonymity for the buyer and a clause about provenance education appended to its display. I used part of the proceeds to settle debts she'd incurred in her reckless pursuit and part to invest in the studio I'd always wanted. The rest went into the lawyer's account and to bribe my stomach back into decent food for a while. There was no extravagant parade. There was no gloating. Just practical cleanup and the slow, cold art of repairing a life. People asked later whether I felt better. Revenge is not a bomb. It is a scalpel. It removes a tumor but it leaves a scar. I watched Elena's social life shrink until her name meant little. She moved away from the city, her Instagram quiet and curated but empty. Sometimes I wondered if she learned. Sometimes I hoped she did, but the thing about people like her is they rarely change unless forced by circumstances deeper than humiliation. The notebook I keep for plans sits on my shelf now. The book sits behind glass in a hall I walk past every morning. When I pass it, I feel nothing like jubilation. I feel the steady knowledge that I did what I had to do, to reclaim my name, to reclaim my dignity, to make the people who'd once laughed understand what they missed. The last thing Elena ever said to me, months later, a message when I'd already closed the chapter, was a 2-word text, "You win." I didn't answer. Winning, I discovered, is less about gold and more about the quiet, the return of my mornings toward my canvases, the sound of a brush being dragged across fresh white. I sleep now without being haunted by her laugh. That will have to be enough. And when people ask if it was worth it, I tell them the truth, I didn't do it for revenge alone. I did it so I could be the one to set the record straight. I did it so my sacrifices could mean something again. I did it because someone taught me contempt and I decided, patiently and precisely, to teach them consequences. She once said I was pathetic for handing her something she didn't understand. In the end, the thing she didn't understand exacted a cost she couldn't buy back. It's strange, the silence that comes after a storm. No applause. No fanfare. Just the steady sound of my own breath in the mornings, the scratch of bristles against canvas, the soft creak of floorboards under my weight. Elena disappeared from my life like a stain scrubbed too hard, smudged, blurred, and finally faded. People stopped saying her name. The ones who once paraded her around now turn their faces when she enters a room. She tried to come back, tried to make her voice matter again, but when the crowd doesn't echo back, you don't exist. I see the book sometimes, behind the glass where it belongs, with people standing reverently in front of it, whispering about its history, its value. None of them know it was once tossed aside as a worthless trinket. None of them know it carried the weight of betrayal, humiliation, and revenge. Only I do. And that's enough. She mocked my gift once. She said it made me pathetic. But that same gift buried her pride, stripped her of the throne she built from lies, and left her hollow in the end. Now, whenever I think of her laughter, I remember the truth. She once called me worthless for giving her that gift, but in the end, it was the only thing that proved her worth was nothing at all.